This video will show you a demonstration of how to create a cultural building footprint in the tools. This is an example of a footprint that has already been created. I will go over the information requested and add new data to my footprint as well. When you create a footprint, you directly land on the General tab, where you can add information needed for the calculations of your carbon emissions. First, we ask you to select the year for which you are creating your footprint. For this demonstration, I am creating a footprint for my fiscal year 2022-2023. The two boxes here are quite important. Make sure the first box is checked if you're using real data. On the contrary, if you're running a test footprint to run different emission scenarios, make sure to leave the first box unchecked. Since this demo is not using real data, I will keep it unchecked. However, the second box needs to be checked if you're submitting data to be used for the carbon footprint calculations. If the box is not checked, the data will not be analyzed in the results section. Select the province in which your cultural building is located. Since the tools have been tailored to the Canadian context, the energy sources for each province have been specifically taken into account to calculate the carbon emissions corresponding to your activities. You are then asked to select a contact person from your organization. Since your submitted footprint goes through a data validation process, a person from your organization would be contacted if any data seems to be abnormally high or low, given the context or size of your building. We then ask you for information about the building itself. In this demo, I am creating a footprint for my Creative Green Theater, so I selected the appropriate type of venue here. I am creating that footprint for a building that has a floor area of 15,000 square feet, and it was built in 1946, so I selected this bracket, and it is a leased building as opposed to owned by your own organization. The floor area is a rough estimate, so I checked this box, and this box is meant to be checked if, for example, you rent a space in a larger building and you don't receive utility bills for the space that you occupy within that building. So in this case, you can calculate your own utilities usage based on your floor area relative to the surface area of the whole building. So to do so, you can ask your office manager or landlord for utilities usage and floor area for the whole building, and then estimate your utilities usage based on the size of your cultural building. So for example, if my theater roughly occupies 10% of the whole building, I can therefore assume that my theater generates 10% of the building utilities data. We received 19,800 visitors so far this year. I can come back regularly to update that number as the months go by. And we have two different performance spaces. We have our Creative Green Hall, and our Tools Hall, each with their own capacity. And this information can be updated as well over time, since so far in the year we have had 61 performances in that space and 22 for that one. We are closed 93 days this year, and we're open on average 39 hours per week. We do have a cafe in the theater with a capacity of 29 people, and we have 6 full-time employees in our building. I invite you to always look at the information icon and roll over it to get any clarification or added information regarding the information that is requested. I can save any data that I added and access the following tab, which in this case is energy use. For this tab, the data can be found in your electricity bills for each energy source that you use if you use more than one. Since it is a building footprint, we are looking at accumulating data for a full year of usage. So you can come back regularly to update your number, for example, every time you receive a new bill. And when writing whole numbers in the tools, make sure to put no space or commas in between the numbers for whole numbers. Of course, if you have a number with a decimal, you can add a dot for that decimal. If you have a green energy provider that offers electricity from renewable energy sources, such as wind or solar, you can indicate it here. And if you can add any additional contextual information, such as if your organization is only open certain month of the year, we invite you to write it in the notes, because if you're closed for a few months in the year, this will be probably reflected in your electricity consumption, and this will be taken into consideration during the data validation process. For my next tab, I have any data related to water. So this information is also found in your water bills, and it represents a full year of usage. In this case, I want to update this data because we received new bills. So I updated the data. I will save, and you will see it reflected in the amount of carbon dioxide emitted by my footprint. If you receive this information in liters rather than cubic meters, you can simply divide the amount of liters by 1,000 to get the corresponding quantity in cubic meters. But once again, this is the type of information that is added in the information icon. I will go into the waste section. This tab asks you for the amount of waste, and it's separating the waste going to landfill from the one going to the recycling and the one going to the compost. If you can choose the units that makes more sense for you given your circumstances, whether that is the number of dumpsters that you have filled throughout the years, or the weekly numbers of bags that you generate, or the monthly numbers of bins that you generate, and make sure to select the appropriate volume for that. Since it is a building type of footprint, the tools will automatically expand the number of bins you use per week or per month to a full year of waste generated. But some of the units, like tons and dumpsters, since they are not rates, you would have to add yourself the number of total tons or of waste, or the total number of dumpsters filled for the entire year. And you can always click on the plus button if ever you want to add any line item to separate your waste in a way that makes sense for you. Here I separated my waste by region of my theater. So I have my halls, the cafe, and the office. So I separated it this way for my compost after doing an audit, a week-long audit of my all my waste. And what I figured out is that we have half a bin of 120 liter for our main office per week. And I multiplied that by 4 to get my monthly amount of bins. So since I had half a bin per week, I multiplied that by 4, which gave me 2 bins. In a similar way, we have 2 bins of 240 liters for our cafe. So we multiplied that number by 4, which gave us 8 bins per month. And for our halls, we have only 1 bin of 120 liters for the halls. So I multiplied that 1 bin by 4. And if it makes more sense for you to accumulate all the waste in a single line item, like I did here, this is the waste going to landfill and recycling for my whole theater. And I chose tons as a unit. After audit, we realized that this was the amount so far that we accumulated, and we will do another audit in the year to come. So this data will be updated, of course, to represent a full year of data. We recommend that you do an audit if throughout the year you have around the same traffic in terms of visitors. If certain seasons are busier than others, you could do an audit of your waste for your busier season and for the rest of the year as well, just to get a better representation of the total waste for the year. but we have also a waste tracker available in our user guide, and you can download and use that tracker to keep track of the waste generated. You have different ways of getting this information, either by an audit or by keeping track with a tracker, for example. And I am saving any information that I add, of course, as I update my data throughout the year. My next tab is audience travel, which is usually linked to a significant source of emissions. In my audience travel tab, I am looking at all the modes of transportation used by my audience to travel to our venue. And to do that, you can either survey the audience as part of the ticket buying process or even at the venue when they arrive. We have a document that advises you on how to get this information, and you can find the link to that document in our user guide. After we surveyed part of our audience, we saw that 15% of our audience traveled by walking to the venue for an average of 2.3 kilometers back and forth. We had 5% of our audience traveling by bike for an average return distance of 8 kilometers. Most of our audience, so 65%, traveled by car for an average return distance of 23 kilometers and an average car occupancy of 2 people. And 35% of our audience travel by public transportation for an average return distance of 12 kilometers. It's possible that all the percentages, such as in this case, accumulate to more than 100%. If you survey your audience and they use more than 2 modes of transportation, or more than 1 mode of transportation, then it's possible that they add up to more than 100%. And in addition to the mode of transportation used, we also have to add the average return distance, like you saw in this example, for each mode of transportation. I have a new data if you have any new data to add, you can always adjust that percentage over time if you survey your audience multiple times and you see that on average your averages change. That could be the case if you develop initiatives to promote your certain modes of transportation by your audience. So for example, if you give a discount to anyone who has a public transportation metro card or public biking system, in this case, if you give a discount and you see that it promotes this type of transportation within your audience, you can always come back and modify that with each survey that you have. Lastly, for the flights, you can refer to the distance here in the information icon to understand the type of duration for the categories of your flight. So what is a short haul flight versus a medium or a long haul flights? You can get this information here. For our next tab, business travel, in this section, you can enter the total distance traveled by your employees for the entire year for each type of transportation. And this also includes the commute to work and back home. You can either add up all the distances in a single line item, or for example, create a line item for each employee. Once again, feel free to adjust it to a way that makes sense for your organization. But here we have one of our employee, Jane Doe, who bikes to work 5 kilometers back and forth, and she works 240 days per year. So that's a total annually of 1,200 kilometers biked by Jane to go to work. Similarly, Mark drives 10 kilometers back and forth to work and also works 240 days per year. So that's a total of 2,400 kilometers traveled by car for Mark to go back and forth to our theater to work. We have a new data here. So one of our employee, Mary, she drives 20 kilometers back and forth to the venue with an electric car. So in this case, I'm going to add a line item for Mary. Instead of having a gasoline vehicle, I'm going to add electric. And in this case, the only unit I can use here is total electricity used. And if you don't have direct information, direct data for this, you can do a simple calculation. So for example, here, Mary works 100 days per year only, and she travels 20 kilometers every time to go to our theater. So that's a total of 2,000 kilometers per year. But since I do not have kilometers or distance travel as a unit, I will translate that into a kilowatt hour type of unit, knowing that her electric vehicle can cover up to 100 kilometers with 15 kilowatt hours. I can do a simple calculations that for 2,000 kilometers, we have a total of 300 kilowatt hour. And feel free to contact us if you want some guidance into how you can find the data. I'm also going to add flights for 2 artists that travel to our venue to perform at our theater. So we had 2 artists coming from Montreal to Toronto. So in this case, I'm going to select Montreal, going to Toronto. And it was a return flight. They had a return flight. This was for their performance. And we have 2 passengers, so 2 artists that took the flight to perform. So I am saving this information. And I will save it also in my tab since I added new data to this category. Our next tab, which is fleet travel, it is similar to the previous tab we looked at, so business travel. However, it's for travels performed with vehicles from your organization. So separating those 2 types of travel, so the ones performed by your personal vehicles and the one by the vehicles from your organization, allows you to understand the impact and the value for your organization to invest in certain types of vehicles, such as electric vehicles or smaller gasoline vehicles for its business travels. So you can look at the data and separating the emissions coming from your employees' own vehicle versus the one owned by your organization. In this case, we got an organization car, so we got one for a theater, and it's a gasoline one, and we only have this data as a total fueled one, since we kept our gas receipts for the year, and we saw that we consumed 304 liters of gasoline for the year for running errands and picking up artists. So I'm saving this new data that I am adding. And I will go into our last tab, which is Beyond Carbon. So Beyond Carbon is a qualitative assessment that will not influence the quantity of carbon emissions generated. It's rather a way to keep track of the practices you already have in place and provide additional information about the initiatives you have to create context around why you do certain things. So it also gives you insights into eco-friendly policies you could develop, as each line is a policy that could be put in place. So I highly advise it if you need inspiration to create an environmental action plan. And in addition, it is a good place to provide feedback for our team, which will be considered for our improvements, for the improvements we want to make with the tools. And you do not need to fill the Beyond Carbon section for each footprint that you create if your organization's context remains the same for all your footprints. Lastly, we have the submit sections. So that's the last tab of your footprint where you can submit your footprint, and there's 3 ways to do so. So the first one is to submit your footprints once it is completed. This is when it goes through our manual data validation process, and you can always edit your footprint later on if needed. The second option is to save the footprint and continue entering data later on. If you choose, for example, to start creating your office footprint and go back each month to update your data, you can choose this section since it will not go through the data validation process until you are submitting it completely. And our last option is to directly look at the results without submitting data that would be added to your ensemble of footprints. If you're running emission scenarios, for example, and simply want to visualize the results of your data, this would be the appropriate option for your submission.